The V'tharr Imperium did not wage war. They conducted it like a grand and terrible symphony. For 20 millennia, their gilded fleets had moved through the void in stately ceremonial formations, their starships not merely vessels of destruction, but works of art, each one a testament to the Imperium's ancient lineage and aesthetic sensibilities. The Sunrender-class dreadnoughts were kilometers of fluted golden armor and soaring crystalline spires, their primary lances capable of cracking a moon with a single elegant burst of energy. War, to the V'tharr, was a ritual, a continuation of diplomacy by other, more glorious means. It was a matter of honor, of spectacle, and of proving their inherent superiority through noble combat. Their society was a rigid hierarchy, a pyramid of warrior poets, artist engineers, and philosopher admirals. They saw the galaxy not as a collection of resources to be exploited, but as a canvas upon which to paint their glorious history. They expanded, not with the frantic hunger of a young species, but with the deliberate, inexorable grace of a glacier, absorbing lesser civilizations into their hegemony, with a mixture of overwhelming force and cultural condescension. When their expansionist gaze fell upon the resource-rich cluster of star systems humanity had recently colonized, they saw an opportunity for a brief, beautiful, and utterly decisive campaign. The initial scouting reports on the Terran Federation were unimpressive. Their ships were ugly, utilitarian blocks of gray metal, scarred by welding marks and devoid of any aesthetic consideration. Their military doctrine, gleaned from intercepted transmissions, seemed a chaotic mess of competing strategies. Their culture was a noisy, discordant symphony of countless different voices. The V'tharr Inquisitors, their xenocultural analysts, concluded that humanity was a young, brutish, and deeply unserious species, ripe for a swift and glorious pacification. The declaration of war was a work of art in itself. It was broadcast on all channels, a soaring epic poem recited by the God Emperor's own herald, detailing humanity's various transgressions, mostly related to poor ship design and a lack of poetic grace in their diplomatic communiques, and culminating in a formal challenge to meet the V'tharr's glorious pacification fleet in the Kepler's Veil Nebula for a decisive, honorable engagement. On Mars, in the utilitarian subterranean headquarters of the Terran Combined Fleet, Admiral Jorik Petrov read the transcript of the declaration, his face a mask of weary disbelief. "They're challenging us to a formal duel with starships." His chief strategist, a woman named Anya Sharma, whose mind was a razor-sharp calculator of probabilities and logistics, nodded. "It seems so, Admiral. Their entire culture is built on this kind of ritualized conflict. Their tactics are predictable. Their formation ceremonial. They expect us to meet them, line for line, in a battle of capital ships." Petrov looked at the holographic display showing the projected strength of the V'tharr fleet. It was a collection of magnificent, powerful vessels, each one a match for humanity's finest battleships. A direct line-for-line engagement would be costly, bloody. "They see this as a test of honor, of strength," Sharma continued, her eyes gleaming with a cold, analytical light. "They see their ships as irreplaceable works of art, their warriors as noble heroes. They value the quality of the victory above all else." Petrov leaned back in his chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. "And we, Anya? What do we value?" Sharma's smile was a mirror of his own. "The bottom line, Admiral. We value the bottom line." The response sent back to the V'tharr was uncharacteristically brief, and to their sensibilities, offensively prosaic. From Terran Combined Fleet Command to V'tharr Glorious Pacification. Fleet Subject, your declaration. Message: we accept your challenge. See you at the Veil. The V'tharr were almost insulted by the lack of ceremony, but they were also pleased. The brutish humans, it seemed, had at least enough honor to accept a formal duel. The stage was set for a glorious textbook victory. Fleet Lord Korthak of the V'tharr Imperium stood on the observation deck of the Sunrender, his personal dreadnought and the flagship of the glorious pacification fleet. The ship was a masterpiece, its internal chambers adorned with intricate carvings, its corridors echoing with the soft melodic hum of a perfectly tuned star drive. Korthak himself was a figure of noble bearing, his ceremonial armor inlaid with precious metals, his face a mask of serene confidence. He was a warrior poet, a veteran of 100 glorious campaigns, and he anticipated this battle with the quiet satisfaction of an artist about to complete a masterpiece. The Kepler's Veil Nebula was a swirling canvas of iridescent gas and newborn stars, a suitably dramatic backdrop for the coming engagement. Korthak's fleet was arrayed in the perfect sun lance formation, a maneuver of breathtaking beauty and tactical elegance. His cruisers, destroyers, and frigates moved with the precision of a celestial ballet, their gilded hulls catching the light of the nebula. Scanners detect the human fleet approaching. "Fleet Lord," his second-in-command chimed, his voice a respectful melody. "On screen," Korthak commanded. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the approaching human forces. Korthak's serene expression faltered for a fraction of a second. The human fleet was pathetic. A handful of their ugly, blocky battleships, a few dozen cruisers. It was a token force, an insultingly small offering. He had expected a grand clash of titans, not this paltry skirmish. "They are either fools, or they hold us in contempt," Korthak murmured, a flicker of irritation disturbing his calm. "No matter. Their folly will be their undoing. Prepare the primary lances. We will grant them a swift, honorable end." But as the human ships drew closer, the V'thar's long-range sensors began to pick up anomalies. Thousands of them. Small, insignificant energy signatures swarming around the human capital ships like gnats. "What are those?" Korthak asked, his brow furrowing. "Unknown, Fleet Lord. They appear to be small single-pilot craft, minimal shielding, low-grade power signatures. They are disposable." Disposable. The word hung in the air, alien and distasteful. Nothing in the V'thar's philosophy of war was disposable. Every ship, every warrior, was a precious asset, a part of the glorious whole. Then, the swarm was unleashed. From the bellies of the human battleships, from hidden launch bays on the cruisers, poured a tide of small, ugly, and incredibly fast ships. They weren't elegant fighters. They were little more than engines strapped to a cockpit and a weapon system. They were drones. Thousands upon thousands of them. On Mars, millions of miles away, in a darkened, cavernous bunker, sat the pilots. They weren't grizzled veterans in flight suits. They were teenagers, gamers, remote piloting specialists, their faces illuminated by the glow of their control screens, their fingers dancing across complex interfaces. They were the new face of human warfare, a generation raised on virtual combat, their reflexes honed in countless simulations. They felt no G-forces, no fear of death. To them, this was the ultimate raid, the final boss battle. The V'tharr fleet, prepared for a stately exchange of energy lances, was suddenly engulfed in a chaotic, three-dimensional storm of drones. Their point defense systems, designed to track and destroy a few dozen enemy fighters, were overwhelmed by the sheer number of targets. The drones were laughably fragile. A single hit from a V'tharr pulse cannon would vaporize one. But for every drone destroyed, 10 more took its place. They swarmed the magnificent V'tharr ships, their plasma cannons and kinetic impactors chipping away at the gilded armor, their missiles targeting exposed sensor arrays and maneuvering thrusters. It wasn't a battle. It was an infestation. Korthak, watched in horrified disbelief as his beautiful, elegant fleet was subjected to this undignified assault. The Sunrender, his pride and joy, was being peppered by 1,000 tiny, insignificant impacts. Its shields flickered, its armor was being scarred, not by glorious energy lances, but by the cosmic equivalent of 1,000 angry wasps. "Fire the primary lances!" Korthak roared, his composure finally breaking. "Wipe them from the sky!" The Sunrender and its escorts unleashed their devastating main weapons. Beams of pure white-hot energy tore through the drone swarm, incinerating hundreds in a single blast. But it was like firing a cannon at a cloud of flies. The swarm simply parted around the beams and then reconverged, their relentless assault continuing. The human capital ships, meanwhile, stayed at a safe distance, acting as mobile command and control centers, their primary role to launch more and more drones. They weren't fighting a battle of ships, they were fighting a battle of production capacity. The turning point came when a squadron of specialized drones, heavier and slower than the others, breached the Sunrender's overwhelmed point defense grid. They weren't armed with weapons. They were armed with limpet mines. They latched onto the dreadnought's hull, their magnetic clamps digging into the golden armor, and then they detonated. The explosions were minor, insignificant against the sheer bulk of the Sunrender, but they were precisely targeted. They struck the external conduits of the ship's primary shield emitters. The Sunrender's shields flickered, then died. The drone swarm, no longer impeded by the energy barrier, descended upon the flagship with a renewed fury. They targeted its engines, its weapon emplacements, its bridge. Alarms blared across the Sunrender's observation deck. Consoles sparked and exploded. The ship, a masterpiece of V'tharr engineering, began to list, its melodic hum replaced by the harsh grating sound of failing systems. Korthak, his face a mask of ash and disbelief, gave the order he had never imagined he would have to give. Retreat. Signal a tactical withdrawal. The surviving V'tharr ships, their formations broken, their honor in tatters, turned and fled, harried every step of the way by the relentless drone swarm. Back on Mars, Admiral Petrov and Anya Sharma watched the final data streams from the battle. "Status report," Petrov said, his voice quiet. "V'tharr fleet in full retreat," Sharma replied, her eyes on the data. "Their flagship, the Sunrender, is crippled. We've lost approximately 4,700 drones. Estimated cost, negligible. The factories on Luna are already producing replacements. We can have the swarm replenished in 3 days." Petrov nodded slowly. "And their losses?" "1 dreadnought crippled, 3 cruisers heavily damaged, a dozen frigates destroyed. The cost to them, in terms of resources, time, and honor, is incalculable." The doctrine of asymmetric attrition had just been proven, written in the fiery wreckage of 1,000 cheap drones and the shattered pride of a galactic empire. Humanity had just taught the V'tharr their first brutal lesson in a new kind of war. The V'tharr Imperium reeled from the humiliation of Kepler's Veil. Their warrior poets composed lengthy, tragic epics about the dishonorable swarm and the cowardice of the remote foe. Their engineers, however, were more pragmatic. They began to retrofit their ships with advanced point defense systems designed to counter the drone threat. Their strategists, grudgingly, began to incorporate screening ships and picket lines into their elegant formations. They expected humanity to repeat their tactic. They were wrong. Humanity, a species that had elevated the concept of the metagame to an art form, never used the same trick twice if they could help it. The next major engagement took place in the asteroid fields of the Epsilon Eridani system. The V'tharr fleet, now prepared for a drone assault, advanced cautiously. But there were no drones. Instead, the asteroids themselves came alive. Humanity had spent weeks seeding the asteroid field with kinetic impactors, essentially large rocks with rocket engines strapped to them. They were crude, ugly, and ridiculously cheap to produce. Guided by remote operators, this artificial meteor storm slammed into the V'tharr fleet. The V'tharr shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, struggled against the sheer brute force of a multi-ton rock traveling at relativistic speeds. Their advanced point defense systems, tuned to track small, fast-moving drones, were overwhelmed by the sheer size and number of the incoming projectiles. A V'tharr cruiser, a vessel of breathtaking beauty, was struck by a particularly large chunk of iron ore. Its shields collapsed, its hull buckled, and it was sent tumbling into the void, a silent, broken monument to the folly of predictable warfare. But the kinetic impactors were just the beginning. Humanity's ungentlemanly war escalated. They introduced Q-ships, heavily armed warships disguised as civilian freighters. A V'tharr patrol, expecting to find a helpless merchant vessel, would be suddenly ambushed by a barrage of missiles from a ship that looked like it should be hauling space grain. They waged a relentless campaign of information warfare. V'tharr, communication networks, pristine and unfirewalled, were flooded with a chaotic torrent of human internet culture. Their serene, melodic transmissions were interrupted by screaming heavy metal music, nonsensical memes, and endless loops of pre-integration cat videos. Their strategists, trying to coordinate their elegant formations, found their screens filled with pop-up ads for cheap human consumer goods. The psychological impact on the highly ordered, aesthetically sensitive V'tharr was devastating. And then there were the Rust Devils. Humanity's special forces were not the noble, honor-bound warriors of V'tharr legend. They were ghosts, saboteurs, pragmatic professionals who valued results over glory. A small, stealthy vessel, barely detectable by V'tharr sensors, would slip past their picket lines and attach itself to a V'tharr supply depot or a shipyard in a deep sleep cycle. The Rust Devils would then infiltrate the facility, not to engage in heroic combat, but to sow chaos. Their most effective weapon was a nanite virus, a microscopic plague designed to eat away at the specific alloys used in V'tharr ship construction. The virus was slow-acting, its effects not immediately apparent. But over time, the magnificent gilded hulls of the V'tharr fleet began to show signs of a strange, creeping corrosion. A hairline fracture would appear in a structural support. A power conduit would fail for no apparent reason. A weapon emplacement would suddenly seize up. The V'tharr engineers were baffled. Their ships, the pride of their civilization, were literally rotting from the inside out. Fleet Lord Korthak, his spirit scarred by the humiliation of Kepler's veil, now found himself fighting a war he no longer understood. He was a master of the grand, elegant dance of fleet combat. But how could one dance with an opponent who refused to even enter the ballroom, preferring instead to throw rocks through the windows and broadcast deafeningly loud, atonal music? He stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Indomitable Will, a vessel even more powerful and beautiful than the Sunrender. But the ship felt fragile. Its hull was constantly being patched from 1,000 minor impacts. Its systems were plagued by inexplicable glitches. His crew, once serene and confident, were now jumpy and irritable, their focus shattered by the relentless, chaotic nature of the human assault. Korthak requested a full accounting of their losses since the beginning of the conflict. The report that came back was a chilling document, a testament to the brutal efficiency of the human war machine. They had not lost a single major fleet engagement in the traditional sense. They had, in fact, won every battle where the humans had deigned to meet them in a semblance of proper combat. But the cost, the butcher's bill, as the translated human term so crudely put it, was staggering. For every human, capital ship lost, the V'tharr had lost 3. For every V'tharr warrior killed in glorious combat, humanity had lost a dozen drone pilots, safely ensconced in their bunkers millions of miles away. The resource expenditure was even more lopsided. A single V'tharr cruiser, a work of art that took years to construct, cost more than the entire drone swarm that had crippled the sun render. Korthak looked at the numbers, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of something he had never experienced before. Doubt. They were winning, by every metric of honorable warfare. But they were also losing. They were being bled dry, not by a superior foe, but by an opponent who treated war not as a matter of honor, but as a grim, relentless calculation of cost and effect. He tried to explain this to the High Council on V'tharr Prime. He spoke of the dishonorable tactics, the economic attrition, the psychological toll on his warriors. The Council, steeped in millennia of tradition, was dismissive. HFY. "Speak of costs, Fleet Lord," one of the elder counselors chimed, his tone condescending. "But what is the cost of honor? What is the price of glory? We will not stoop to the level of these brutish humans. We will meet them with the full, glorious might of the Imperium, and we will crush them." Korthak knew then that his people were doomed. They were trying to win a symphony, while the humans were playing a brutal, efficient, and utterly deafening drum solo. The contrast between the two civilizations at war could not have been more stark. On V'tharr Prime, the war was a distant, glorious spectacle. The populace watched holographic replays of battles, edited to show the beauty of their formations and the elegance of their weaponry. They composed epic poems about the bravery of their warriors. The loss of a ship was a cause for national mourning, a day of solemn ceremony and artistic expression. Their economy, built on a foundation of artisanal craftsmanship and aesthetic value, continued to produce magnificent, powerful, and incredibly expensive warships. On Earth and its colonies, the EIA home front was a scene of total, relentless mobilization. The war was not a spectacle. It was a problem to be solved. Gigantic, ugly, and incredibly efficient factory complexes on Luna and Mars churned out drones, kinetic impactors, and missile components 24/7. Civilian hackers operating from their basements and dorm rooms volunteered their time to the information. Warfare effort, their primary motivation a gleeful sense of anarchic mischief. The entire human economy, a chaotic but incredibly dynamic engine of production, was geared towards a single goal: to produce more, cheaper, and faster than the enemy. The culture became grim, determined, and brutally pragmatic. News reports focused not on glory, but on kill ratios and resource expenditure. The heroes of the war were not the dashing pilots, but the logistical geniuses who managed the supply chains, the engineers who designed a cheaper, more efficient drone engine, the factory workers who exceeded their production quotas. The V'tharr believed they were at war with the Terran combined fleet. They didn't understand that they were at war with the entirety of human civilization, with its restless innovation, its chaotic creativity, and its almost religious devotion to the principles of mass production and economic efficiency. Desperate to restore morale and to force the humans into a decisive, honorable engagement, the V'tharr High Council devised a grand strategy. They would concentrate the bulk of their remaining fleet for a single, overwhelming assault on Proxima B, humanity's oldest and most populous extrasolar colony. They announced their intention on all channels, a formal, final challenge. Surely the humans would not abandon their most precious world. Surely they would have to meet them in a proper battle to defend it. To their surprise, humanity accepted. The Terran Combined Fleet, it was announced, would meet the V'tharr Grand Armada in the skies above Proxima B for the final, decisive Battle of the War. Fleet Lord Korthak, despite his misgivings, felt a flicker of his old warrior's pride. Perhaps at long last he would have his glorious, honorable battle. Perhaps, in the end, the humans had some semblance of honor after all. The V'tharr Grand Armada arrived in the Proxima system, a breathtaking sight. hundreds of their most powerful warships, their golden hulls gleaming, arrayed in the perfect ceremonial Emperor's Wrath formation. They were met by the human fleet, a surprisingly large force, their ugly, blocky ships holding a steady defensive line. The battle began. The V'tharr advanced, their primary lances firing in a coordinated, devastating volley. The human ships returned fire. The battle was fierce, chaotic, and strangely one-sided. The human ships seemed to be exploding with surprising ease. Korthok felt a surge of triumph. Perhaps the brutish humans were no match for the true might of the Imperium after all, but as his fleet pushed deeper into the human formation, his sensor operators began to report anomalies. The energy signatures of the exploding human ships were wrong. They were too low. The debris patterns were inconsistent. Then, the trap was sprung. The space around the V'tharr fleet, which had seemed empty just moments before, was suddenly filled with the blossoming fire of thousands of self-guiding smart minds. The human fleet, it turned out, was mostly holographic decoys, designed to draw the V'tharr into a prearranged kill box, and then the final devastating blow. Across the V'tharr fleet, alarms began to blare. Power conduits failed. Shield emitters flickered and died. Weapon systems seized up. The nanite virus, the insidious plague of the Rust Devils, had finally reached its terminal stage. The magnificent ships of the V'tharr Imperium, the pride of their civilization, were rotting from the inside out. The real human fleet, smaller, faster, and positioned on the flanks of the V'tharr formation, then began their attack. They didn't engage in a line battle. They moved in for the kill, their missiles and plasma cannons tearing through the crippled, defenseless V'tharr ships. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. A cold, efficient, and utterly dishonorable execution. Fleet Lord Korthok stood on the bridge of the indomitable will, his ship adrift, its systems failing, its beautiful gilded hull scarred and corroded. He watched as his fleet, the pride of the V'tharr Imperium, was systematically dismantled by an enemy who refused to play by the rules. And in that moment of utter, crushing defeat, he finally, truly understood. He accessed the battle data, the resource expenditure reports, the casualty figures. He ran the calculation, the grim, brutal arithmetic of this new kind of war. For every glorious V'tharr warrior who died in his magnificent, artfully crafted warship, a human teenager in a darkened room on a distant planet simply logged off, perhaps to grab a soda before their next shift. For every V'tharr dreadnought, a masterpiece of engineering that took a generation to build, humanity had expended a few thousand cheap, mass-produced drones, a few hundred ugly, rocket-propelled rocks, and a handful of invisible, microscopic machines that ate metal. They were not losing a war of honor or territory or even military might. They were losing a war of spreadsheets. They were being driven into bankruptcy by an opponent who had turned warfare into a brutal, efficient, and soul-crushingly pragmatic industrial process. The V'tharr Imperium sued for peace. There was no grand ceremony, no epic poem of surrender. Just a quiet, prosaic data packet sent from the remnants of their shattered fleet. The terms were simple. They would cede the contested territories. They would pay reparations for the initial aggression. They would formally acknowledge the Terran Federation as a sovereign and equal power. To the humans, it was a logical, satisfactory end to a costly but necessary conflict. They had achieved their objectives, secured their borders, and protected their interests. The war was over. Time to get back to business. To the V'tharr, it was the ultimate, unforgivable humiliation. They had not been defeated in a glorious battle by a superior foe. They had been out-competed. They had been made obsolete. They had been treated not as a noble adversary, but as an inefficient business model, a costly line item on a balance sheet. A problem to be solved with the most cost-effective solution. Fleet Lord Korthok, stripped of his titles but his life spared, retired to a quiet monastery on a distant moon. He spent his remaining days trying to compose an epic poem about the war, but he could never find the words. How could one find glory in a spreadsheet? How could one find honor in a kill ratio? Humanity, the grim, pragmatic accountants of the galaxy, had taught the ancient, magnificent V'tharr Imperium the true cost of modern warfare. The doctrine of asymmetric attrition had won, not by conquering, but by making conquest unprofitable. And the galaxy, for better or for worse, would never be the same. The age of the warrior poet was over. The age of the industrial logistical complex had begun.